Rupa, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for this chat. For people who don't know you, you've been a prolific writer in Ottawa for a number of years, writing for a number of publications. You're now with the Free Press, an American outlet, correct?
That's right. Yeah. I write for Barry Wise's The Free Press. It used to be called Common Sense. And then we really just grew to the point that we became the Free Press and hired a whole bunch of people. We started off really small when I began writing for them. And now, we're um, a formidable news outlet, and that shows just how successful it's been.
So I've been following you since roughly around the Freedom Convoy time, and
Hmm.
I'm sure I've read many of your articles ahead of that. But I really started to pay attention to who was writing the articles around that time, and
Hmm.
you had a lot of publications in the National Post, a number of these large
Hmm.
Canadian outlets, and speaking of that, this is the whole idea was finding out who is telling the truth and who is not telling the truth. And that's really
Hmm.
what my channel ended up forming around, was this idea that we're not all the outlets aren't exactly honest with us anymore.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's this idea of a narrative being spun, and them, whatever the actors out there that are spinning the narrative have
Hmm.
perverse incentives to tell you things by lying to you or simply omitting certain facts to
Hmm.
steer you in a particular direction. So this is where I came upon your work, and I found your work to be quite honest and genuine. And we can get into a lot of that. But today, I want to talk about the article that you wrote and you interviewed me for. And
Hmm.
this is a hot button issue right now in Canada, and it's because, well, the Team Canada thing and all of that stuff that's been going on. I've been reporting on it and getting good and bad feedback
Hmm.
depending on who you're having a conversation with now. So the title of the article is "Will Trump's Tariffs rob the victory from Canada's Conservatives?" Now, I've made this argument that I think that the stance that they're taking on this Team Canada approach largely doesn't look much different than what the Liberals are taking in this regard. And this is making for an unsavory sort of thing. People want an opposition in some camps, and other people outright want Pierre Poilievre or the Conservatives to be something that they're not, apparently. And this is kind of
Hmm.
what's come out in recent times. I just wanted to get your, well, obviously the link is in the description for everybody to go and read this article. It's great, and we'll probably pull some excerpts up throughout this conversation. But I just want
Hmm.
to get your take on what brought you to write this article and the evolution from there.
Thanks, Clyde. Yeah, I've been thinking about this for quite some time, actually. I'd been trying to figure out where Pierre Poilievre actually stands on conservative issues. I'm a small c conservative and a lifelong small c conservative, actually. And these are issues that I care about, especially in the context of this country. I'd been trying to figure out, given that he's been riding so high in the polls, I'd been trying to figure out where exactly does he stand on these various issues, and just the state of conservatism in Canada. I feel like I'm sort of I feel like an alien, actually, not alien in the American sense of of being an illegal alien, but an alien like from outer space, in the sense that I am a I started off, unlike most young people, I started off as a libertarian and a conservative. I bypassed the whole communist, uh, progressive phase of my youth. I just got into conservatism right off the bat. And I was inspired by Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and and read the works of Hayek and von Mises, and these are people who've guided my intellectual development over the years. And so
Really? Wow. Okay.
yes, yeah, so in Canada, I've always felt like I was a bit of an oddball here, because I'm very American in my desire for freedom and liberties and free speech and all of these things that I care about. But here, as soon as I've been here for nearly 30 years now. And as I discovered, even as a young person at that time, we were always there was always a but at the end of everything. We are free. You can be free, but here's a list of things you cannot do. Yeah, yes, socialized healthcare is has all of these problems, but it's a defining Canadian value, and we can never get rid of it, and it can never be on the ballot, and end of story. That's the end of the discussion. And I found those things extremely stifling. But also keep in mind that I also came from some very repressive societies. I partly grew up in India, and then grew up in the Middle East. So I had the experiences of growing up in the world's largest democracy, um, uh, and at the same time, I also experienced a certain kind of authoritarianism in the Middle East, where I spent my years as a teen before I came to Canada. And with both those experiences, I realized I just wasn't comfortable with all of these buts in every conversation. I was not
Mhm.
okay with people stifling my desire to explore further on a certain when it came to a certain topic, or I felt like my intellectual development was being stymied at every step of the way, and I didn't like that. And so when I first came to Canada, it was very, very refreshing being here, because I could finally have these conversations with people. I could get the books that I wanted to read. I could explore myself intellectually in any direction that I wanted. Right, there was no one that was going to stop me. Um, and that was all great. And then fast forward to what I find myself in, um, just in the last few years, and I feel like I don't recognize this country anymore. Perhaps that's because this country was always that way. It certainly, I certainly experienced that as a much younger person as well. That there were just some topics you were not allowed to go there, because it was just not something that you did as a polite member of society or whatever. You just couldn't question certain things. You couldn't question immigration. You couldn't talk about culture and identity. These are things that most Canadians, and this predates Trudeau, by the way. I mean, he's obviously accelerated much of this. He's brought Canada to a point where these things are a lot more um, uh, what's the word there, it's a lot more prominent now. It's in the form of wokeism and progressivism. But we have to keep in mind that this country was always progressive, and at its core. And so maybe it was always this way. I know it was always this way. It's just become a little more pronounced now. And so for me, where we're at right now, I just find that this we're not in a good place. I can tell you, I spent a decade in India, and and even there, I was uh, trying to make the case for individual liberties and free speech, and opening up the economy further. So
What is that
more,
battle like in India? The individual
uh,
liberties, and
it's
I don't know. I wouldn't
you don't
understand that.
you don't I was partly animated by the fact that when Modi the current prime minister was campaigning in 2013, you know, he came across like some of the stuff that he was saying. He was saying minimum government, maximum governance. And this was music to my ears. Like, it was like, wow,
And
you
then he
know,
got in, and then
then it was a
like
totally different, yeah, totally different situation altogether. And you know, he's being a politician. He's going to do what he has to do to win elections, right? But ultimately, these things come down to the people. If there's no grassroots push for these fundamental rights with respect to our individual liberties, you know, what is a politician going to do? You know, I'm pretty cynical. I'm not, you know, I don't think a politician is just magically going to do the right thing and for us, right? At the end of the day, they do take cues from their voters, and that's just how it is.
well, they do that once every 4 years or so, and this is the argument that we're having in Canada right now. Is, you know, once they get in government, what? You know, they
Yeah.
want to know, and they'll follow the polls on what's popular in the moment and what's happening now, because there's an election coming. But once they get in, like, all the talks of getting rid of corruption go away, all the talks of transparency go away. I mean, there are a lot of people right now that are in the conservative camp that were voters for Justin Trudeau in 2015. When he came out with this, we're going to change the voting system, we're going to legalize pot, and we're going to make government transparent. And
Yeah.
it's been the most opaque, non-transparent government that Canada's ever seen, with probably the most amount of corruption. And so Canadians are like, you know, you get the rah-rah, you get the excitement of a new leader and all this other stuff with Pierre Poilievre, but then things start sinking in, and you start asking the questions. Hold on. Are you going to investigate what happened over the past 10 years? Are you going to try to get criminal prosecutions for the things, for the billions of dollars that were embezzled? Are we going to see justice for the trampling of people's fundamental rights during the COVID pandemic, and then into the Freedom Convoy? Are we going to see any of that? Is that something that we'll see? Or is this just going to be another political game? Vote for me, rah, rah, rah. And then nothing comes of it.
Yeah, you're right. That's just the nature. Unfortunately, that's the nature of politics, right? Politicians, whoever they are, as charismatic as they can be, you know, tend to, you know, they'll campaign on certain things, and then when they're actually in power, very little of that is actually, very few of those promises are actually, you know, are met, with one big exception: Trump. Right?
Donald Trump.
Because we've seen this. You know, the American system is great because, you know, the first 100 days really matter. What you do in the first 100 days, right? It's just a feature of the American system.
Well, and it's when you have the utmost amount of mandate, you know, you
Yeah.
have the will of the
Yeah.
governed,
Yeah.
and the people have just decided for you to come in. So now it's like maximum, you know, overdrive. Let's go into it and get as much done as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so I think Trump, in a way, has, you know, carried out everything that he's promised. And I think for a lot of people, they're just stunned, you know, that you can finally have an elected leader who, can actually be taken at his word and do the right thing, and you know, and keep his promises. And that's what Trump has done. And that creates expectations, I think, not just in Canada, but around the world. You know, I hear chatter from, you know, other corners of the world. Wow, you know, if I don't like what Trump is doing necessarily, or, you know, they'll say, I don't like what he's doing necessarily, but the fact of the matter is that he campaigned on these issues and he's carrying them out.
He's delivering.
You know, he's delivering, and in a really big way. You don't have to agree with those issues, but the point is, you know, do politicians actually, can we take them at their word? And in this case, I think we you know, we can. And he did that even in 2016. I mean, as much as he could, but I think in 2017 when he was, when the administration was inaugurated. I think he tried to do a lot of things, but you could argue that they just didn't realize just the extent of the pushback that they would get. And I think this time around they're a little more organized, they're a little more prepared, and it's it's all it's basically all systems go when it comes to carrying out his agenda.
I would say the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, he actually beat him to the punch on this, delivering on promises. And but the thing is, in both Canada and in both Argentina and in the United States, they were met with a populace of people that were ready for it. They were ready for liberty, and they knew what to expect with liberty as well. Liberty comes with responsibilities. Sorry, there's a lot of freebies that are going to have to go away in this situation, especially in Argentina, because the prices are going up. It's getting really expensive to live there right now. A friend of mine, who incidentally know him through the convoy, Dave, he was known as Live from the Shed. He's actually down there right now being a snowbird, doing it in Argentina. And I spoke with him and he said, yeah, it's getting really expensive, but people see it as, they see the hope. They see the light at the end of the tunnel. They know it's going to be a little bit of hard times, but they're making drastic measures to bring back liberty. And when people see that, and then now in America, they're seeing that, now people are starting to say, we want the drastic measures. We don't want this limp-wristed conservatism anymore. And there's a new rise in conservatism that's pushing, and I'm part of this camp that's saying, because I'm more of like you said, the libertarian. I've read Mises, I've read all of this stuff, and that fascinated me. And I want limited government, small government, like like the United States founding fathers wanted. And it seems like in Canada we don't have really an appetite for that. Whether it's a large portion of the voting base, or it's the political class themselves. Now, I wanted to grab a quote from your article from today. This is Eric Kaufman. I'm now familiar with Eric Kaufman, and I'm going to want to read his books because I like the way he thinks. But I tweeted this one out saying, absolutely on point. The article's here. But this is Eric Kaufman, a professor of politics at the University of Buckingham, argues that Poilievre's reluctance to mimic Trump reflects on a fact that Canadian conservatism has always been very wet, he says in quotes, with conservative politicians reluctant to challenge the progressive consensus on the cultural identity. Poilievre only takes a stand on social issues like DEI and immigration when there's already overwhelming momentum in the press. He still plays within the safe sandbox of talking about economics issues, which is permitted for conservatives and politicians in Canada. He says also, and if he were to become prime minister, not expecting any kind of radical change don't expect any radical change on the woke front. Now, the radical change that's coming on the woke front, I actually did an article about this this morning, or a video talking about this. Corporations are pulling out of woke. We saw just this morning, Toronto's Pride Parade has lost a bunch of their corporate sponsors.
Right.
British Petroleum is backing off of all of their DEI stuff, and they're just going straight to what they do best: petroleum products and fossil fuels. And it's like the culture's moving forward in certain aspects, but the political classes, they want none of it. And in this even includes the conservatives. Like you read my tweet about saying that it's going to be exhausting with Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservatives. He's going to have to come along with all these issues, kicking and screaming as we drag him through it. It's like there's no political will to do this. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Eric Kaufman, and I agree with you as well, Clyde. That so back to Eric Kaufman, where he talks about how conservatism in this country, it's just always been it's been very, very different from the United States, right? I mean, the premise of this country itself is quite different from the United States, so that's an important starting point. But back to Pierre Poilievre, because that's who we're talking about. You pointed to radical change. We're looking for radical change. My point is, if we don't have a politician right now that advocates radical change of the kind that you and I would like to see on a range of different topics, that includes both the economy and social issues, and we don't have a politician that comes up with very specific reforms in terms of what they would like to do. You brought up Argentina. I would say we're going to be the next Argentina. And I'll tell you why. This is a really well-known fact. Argentina, at the beginning of the 20th century, had about the same per capita income as the US and Canada. More than a century later of economic mismanagement, government excessive government spending, and socialism, let's not forget that, their income now is only about a third of the US. And back here in Canada, we fall into about a little more than 70% of US national income, when we were on par with them just 2 decades ago.
That's right.
And so this, for me, that's the crux of the matter, right? That we, I think axe the tax is great. I mean, axe as many taxes as you possibly can, because we're overtaxed in this country. But I feel like the writing is on the wall for us if we don't mend our ways. And that also, it's not just a Pierre Poilievre thing. It's also about people, their desire for radical change, right? Are Canadians willing to, have a two-tier healthcare system, for example? Are Canadians willing to have less socialism?
I've always said this as an advocate for a private medical system in Canada.
Yeah.
We already have a two-tiered system for all intents and purposes. Canadians, when our socialized medicine fails, go to the United States.
Exactly. But given that we're all paying taxes and we're taxed to death, essentially, we should have that option here, or we should get our money's worth, right? I've not had a family doctor. I've not been able to get a doctor for 15, 16 years. This is just atrocious. I see a doctor when I visit my parents in India, and I get the best private healthcare that I can afford with what I'm willing to pay. And so the point is that we can criticize Pierre Poilievre for not advocating for radical change on some of these things that some of us small c conservatives care about. But at the end of the day, as I said to you earlier, politicians take their cue from the public, right? And if people in this country are not, at this point, after everything that has happened, we've basically hit the bottom of the barrel, in a sense, the socialism barrel. And if at this point we're not looking to reform our healthcare system, and by reform I mean we really do need a private option. I realize
we don't really have a good excuse to not do it. I mean, we're the only country in the OECD that doesn't.
Yeah.
And every other country that touts their success with their socialized medicine, that's arguable whether those successes that they tout are legitimate. But they all have private options. I mean, it was the NHS in England. There's a private option. You don't have to go through the National
Right.
Health Service. You
Right.
can go with a private doctor if you want. And it
Yeah.
actually alleviates the burden on the public health system when
Yeah.
people go into the private system.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it's not just the healthcare system, which is basically on its last legs at this point. Almost every day you hear of someone who's died in the emergency room because they weren't attended to right away. I mean, this is unacceptable. We shouldn't have to put up with this. Where is the anger? Like, I am angry all the time when I read these stories, and I look to my to my fellow Canadians, and I just wonder, where's the anger and the wish for change? Why are you not advocating for these things? Why are you willing to put up with? We're not even at the mediocre stage. We're just at this point closer to third world standards on so many different things. And it just makes me very upset and depressed at the state of affairs. It's not just the healthcare system; it's our telecom sector. It's the supply management, where we pay very, very high prices for our dairy and eggs and so on. Why are we willing to put up with this, with the status quo? And this is where it, for me, this is where it gets a little difficult when I, or this is where I have questions when it comes to Pierre Poilievre, because what we need are radical changes right now, and perhaps he's not advocating for radical changes of the kind that that I speak about, because he's taking his cue from the public or from the polling or whatever is going on. But the point is, he's a self-described libertarian, right?
Yeah, he's no slouch. I mean, look at the books that he has on his shelf when he's interviewed in his office, and assuming that he's read them, I would assume.
Oh no,
he speaks about economics.
He knows
what he's talking about.
He's an incredibly smart individual. I have actually met him. He's very well read. He's very articulate. He's extremely intelligent. I do not, that shouldn't even be up for any kind of discussion, really. He's one of the smartest people I've met. But here's the thing, right? He claims to be a libertarian. He loves Milton Friedman. He loves Hayek and so on. But if that were the case, why do you support supply management? Why do you support this socialized and very distorting, one of the most socialized and distorting agricultural systems in the world? I mean, it's just as bad as what the Europeans have. Canadian consumers pay very high prices, and what it ends up doing is that it ends up enriching a few politically connected farmers. And so this is where it gets.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it right there. And it's the political angle, and this is what makes people become cynical about their opinions on this. Now, I tweeted this one out recently. This was a thing that was put out by the Pierre Poilievre camp. It was tweeted on some other MP's Twitter account, but it was the "Let me be clear, we'll never be the 51st state. We'll bear any burden and pay any price to protect our sovereignty and independence." So the pay any price thing, really, this one triggered me. This one got me upset, because it's like, well, what price are we willing to pay? And I wanted to ask, is getting rid of the transfer payments a price that you're willing to pay? Because Alberta might separate from Canada. You want to have sovereignty. Perhaps put that one on the table. How about the dairy lobby, or how about actually prosecuting Chinese organized crime? This is another political thing that, and this is where my cynicism comes from. It's only allowed on the table once it becomes so big that you can't avoid it. The politicians are not leaders if they're not the ones bringing these topics up. This if they want to be leaders, if you want leadership, don't follow the trends. I mean, it's people like us that are bringing this stuff up, not the political class. This is sad.
Yeah, and I would hardly consider people like you and I as fringe.
No,
You know,
no, not in the slightest.
although sometimes I do feel that way because, you know, I'm surrounded by this madness. There's this madness around me that people want more socialism. So maybe you and I are the fringe, Clyde. But you know, the point is, I mean, you'd have to be blind, right, to not see what is happening around you. Our economy has been on life support for years. You know, we've had a lost decade where per capita income is, you know, about the same now as it was a decade ago. Think about that for a second. We've fallen we've fallen far behind our peers in the rich world. You know, I spoke about our healthcare system. You know, we have all of these chronically underfunded socialized sectors in the economy, such as healthcare and education. They're all in crisis. And you know, productivity growth is basically zero. We've been grappling with this problem for a very long time. This even predates Trudeau, by the way. He deserves some of the blame, but you know, this is where I say this quite a bit on social media that the chickens have come home to roost. This was never going to be a sustainable model for us. You know, even the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada recently said it's time to break the glass. So things are really bad, people, and yet I feel like we're not, you know, we're still talking about the carbon tax, you know, whereas I want
You gotta go so much further than that. It's unbelievable.
yeah, we're still talking about the carbon tax. And you know, I would like, you know, I'm a well wisher of the Conservative Party. I'm no adversary. You know, I'm not um you know, I'm fair, but you know, I do
Oh,
ask the
I'm
tough
in the same
questions.
boat. I just
Yeah,
want to see them. I want to see them to be more realistic and
yeah.
less more, less about pandering to the what they think that the average public's understanding of how the world really works is. And this is you understand what I mean, because and I'm
No,
really I'm
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
thrilled to hear that you're a fan of Mises and Hayek. Like, this is
Oh no,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know that about you. So
Oh no,
I
no, no. My email signature when I was a young person had a quote from Mises or Hayek. Uh, where,
I'm
where
meeting so many people in the conservative camp like this, like Franco Terrazzano, for example. His dog is named
yeah,
Ludwig. I love it.
yeah,
I love it. The more
yeah.
people that I learn that
Oh,
are Austrian.
my cat is named after Friedrich von Hayek. He's Friedrich von Hayek, the cat.
That's so awesome. Okay, so
Yeah,
yeah, that makes me excited, because
yeah,
that means that we have more people in Canada that organically are coming to the light, and not seeing this Keynesian economic model, which the Liberals are bringing forward, which is the
yeah,
idea. And we saw this with Mark Carney, and
yeah.
Mark Carney came out with this with Harper, by the way.
Mm-hmm,
This is not something that it was in a vacuum. So
mm-hmm,
Harper, to avoid the '08 crisis, he got into deficit spending, and this is the idea that Hayek came up with, or sorry, that John Maynard Keynes came out with, was this idea that macroeconomics, they don't work like microeconomics. And what you do in a deficit situation, or in a situation where there's an economic downward trend, you do have some deficit spending on the government behalf, inject the economy, get the economy working again, and then pay off those debts. And that's a thing. It's the broken window fallacy. I
mm-hmm,
mean, it's economics 101. But it's the reason why it continues to survive like any other bad meme or mind virus, is that it's popular with governments, because they like to spend money, and so of
mm-hmm,
course they adopt these ideas. Now,
mm-hmm,
that being said, the trouble that we're in with is because Carney turned on the printing press to
mm-hmm,
capitulate to this request of deficit spending and keeping interest rates low, but they
mm-hmm,
never shut it off for
mm-hmm,
over a decade. And
mm-hmm.
this, in my belief, is where a lot of the roots of our financial problems come from, is this massive inflation. And inflation is issuing new money and credit, not the symptom, which is what we measure, the rising prices.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the symptom of what's been going on with that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
with this whole thing, this is where Pierre shines. And I think he comes out, and it's great. It's fantastic to hear somebody with better economic understanding than what has previously come around in government, but then to
Mm-hmm.
then capitulate with the political norms of Canada and not say a peep about the dairy lobby, not say a peep about you know, all of these other economic woes like
Mm-hmm.
transfer payments that are socialistic, the medical system, even though that's a provincial issue, it's
Yeah.
still overseen by the federal government.
Yeah.
Why can't we talk about these things? Why do these taboos exist?
That's a great question. I don't know, brainwashing at schools. I don't know. Maybe people just haven't um, experienced hardship of a kind that, or enough people have experienced the kind of hardship that I had to undergo as a kid growing up in all of these different places. You see, for many of us, who've had this experience of living in places where socialism was on steroids, we've experienced that, and we know that's not the direction we should be going in, and we know that's the road to serfdom, as Hayek said.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes back to the ethos of this country, the founding ethos of this country, which was always premised as being very different from the Americans, who had, where all of their rights were, they had to fight really hard for them, right? When I was in DC a couple of weeks ago, or every time I'm in DC, I'm just struck by how much they value their, you see, quotes about liberty and freedom at every corner,
Mm-hmm.
basically on every office building. I mean, it is part of their culture. So it's a reminder of just what it means to be American, right? Whether it's the First Amendment, or a range of different things. Their defining ethos is to be free. Our defining ethos is good government, and what's that thing? Good government and good governance or something. So,
It's very forgettable. It's
yeah.
that's how
So
great
where
the ethos is.
government, yeah, where government is central to our idea, peace, order, and good government. That's it.
That's right.
Yeah, and the premise in Canada was based on these loyalists, right, to the crown, which is exactly the opposite of the United States. And peace, order, and good government just doesn't sound as powerful. And I mean, imagine, I don't know. I mean, if you were to tell a child, why you should be passionate about liberty, I can make the case, but peace, order, and good government, like I just don't see the passion behind that. I just don't see
Wow.
what.
Actually, I just thought of a great analogy is
Yeah,
teaching a child, because you mentioned that teaching,
yeah,
it's the difference between teaching a child that they shouldn't do something because of the ethics behind it, what's right and wrong,
yeah.
rather than teaching them because you'll get in trouble.
Hmm.
Like if the only thing that keeps you good is that you won't get in trouble,
Yeah,
it's like you're not learning ethics. You can't derive further ethical conundrums on
yeah.
that logic. You'll always have to consult with your authority, and
Hmm.
that's not the idea of liberty. It's not
No.
consultation with authority. It's in fact taking the authority for
Yeah,
yourself,
yeah,
and casting your thoughts about that on your vote, your elected officials. They're not your
yeah.
they represent you. They're not your rulers.
Yeah. I mean, the US, I mean, we're always going to compare ourselves to the Americans, no matter, what the current situation, regardless of the current situation. It's just, we can't just, you know, pick up leave, right? We can't just pick Canada up physically and move to another part of the world. We're always going to have to deal with the Americans, and this difference will always be there, which is, the U.S. was a revolutionary country founded on the premise of liberty. Canada was built by people who didn't want to revolt. There's the difference, right? And that difference continues to exist today. So, and I think that is essentially part of our psyche. It's part of the Canadian psyche to not revolt, to not, you don't want to, you don't want to go beyond your, whatever limit that you don't want to go beyond a certain limit. You may not be happy with the status quo, but you just, you're looking at peace, order, and good government, whatever. And that seems to be the essential, psyche of this country. I mean, going back to Pierre Poilievre and libertarianism, you said something interesting earlier, that something about libertarianism and something about Pierre Poilievre. Sorry, I'm just just trying to think about what you said. But what I wanted to say was that, look, I've identified myself as a libertarian for since I was 20 years old, and as I got older, I realized, it's not actually practical to be a libertarian in a society. It's not just Canada; it's also the United States, where hardcore libertarians will say taxation is theft, and but I don't buy that. I don't agree with that. I do feel like taxation is theft every time I pay my taxes. But but the point is, we do need taxes. We do need the government has to be able to tax to be able to function. I mean, at a bare minimum. I'm not saying 50%, but some reasonable percent of income, I think, should be taxed. But so the point is, you cannot be ideologically just stick to the book and say, this is what libertarianism is about, this is what conservatism is about, and I'm going to stick to that. I think that there's got to be like a middle ground that you've got to reach, where you've got to make some concessions here and there. But the point is, you want to go towards liberty and freedom as much as possible, right? You don't want to go backward. You want to, even within the constraints of the system that we're in, even within the constraints of even the U.S. It's one of the most freest countries in the world, but it still has elements of government overreach, and it's not as bad as here. But the point is, we always have to push further towards liberty as much as we can. And back to Pierre Poilievre, back to him, where he says he's a libertarian. There are things that make me quite concerned. And he also says he's anti-woke, right? But, promising flights to Amritsar is not being anti-woke. That is very much part of being...
Promising flights to what?
To Amritsar, which is a holy city for Sikhs in India. And, he's made that promise at several campaign stops over the months. And I'm thinking, well, if you're a libertarian, shouldn't you be leaving the market to make that decision?
Absolutely.
It should be. It should come down to commercial considerations. Is this financially viable? Not because you want to win the votes of a particular group of people. Correct.
Right.
For example, I used to take the nonstop flight to Mumbai when it operated from Toronto to Mumbai, and then they got rid of it because it just wasn't financially viable for Air Canada to operate that route anymore. So why are we doing Amritsar? I have no idea. And so he's got to stop doing that sort of thing. And it contradicts his when he claims that he's a libertarian or he's anti-woke, because there are these contradictions in what he says at these campaign stops. So I don't know, where were we?
With it, well, how do we get here now? So I do want to talk about this. So because we want to break the cycle, another one of the big popular things that the conservatives have been going along with is the idea of defunding the CBC. And Pierre kind of had a little bit of a whiffle moment where he said he does want to fund some outlets or this or that, but then he came back when there was outcry about that and said, nope, we're defunding the CBC, and he put that on the table as a hard, that's what's happening now. On the liberal camp, in the liberal side, they're talking about doubling the amount of funding to the CBC right now, and they're doing it unilaterally. They're not doing it through Parliament. The Parliament's prorogued, so they're just, I don't know, executive order in council, just doubling the amount of money that's going to the CBC. And we can clearly tell that this is a method of propagandizing the people just before an election. It's obvious that this is the idea here. But then this gets onto the concept of free speech. Now, you're a huge advocate for free speech. Now, one of the ways of the Canadian government denying people their free speech or thwarting free speech being loud enough is by funding the crap out of their speech and not anybody else's speech, just drowning it out with billions of dollars worth of radio time and airway time and all of this. They've been struggling with social media, and because social media largely doesn't have a dollar amount, people will pay the extra bucks just to get no ads, you know, and they just want to hear from people organically. And this has been a big issue with the government, and because of this, they've had a number of policies to thwart people's free speech. Bill C-11, which was designed to muck with algorithms. The Bill C-18, which is supposed to make news agencies official or not official. And it was a payola cash grab from the social media companies for tax revenue, which blew up in their face. And then Bill C-63, which we're glad is over now because of the prorogation of Parliament. But that was a bill to go after people who just said mean words. And they're like vaguely described mean words. We don't know what the mean words would be. And that's very subjective of the person who's saying that the words are mean at the end of the day. But with punitive measures, we're talking about life sentences for certain things. We're talking about house arrest for future crime, potentially, if they believe that you may say mean words on the internet in the future. Like this is really crazy where the direction Canada has been headed. How do we reel that back? I know, get another government, but is that really going to end?
One thing I've learned over the years is that once you have, and again, Trump is an exception because, he can just go into the Oval Office and sign an executive order and get rid of everything that happened before, right? But generally, what I've learned about like Westminster democracies is that once there's a policy, there's something, a piece of legislation that's in place, it's very difficult to get rid of it. It's there. Maybe the next government may not necessarily use that, but why should we trust anyone on that, right? I think this is actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. So we actually have laws that are not good for free speech. The Charter of Rights and Freedom is just not worth anything, really, as we discovered during the pandemic and during the truckers' protests. But, a lot of people will point to, even people who claim to be free speech absolutists will say, oh, that's hate speech. That's hate speech, and there is legislation in Canada that could be used against that individual to send them a message that you cannot say this. against whatever community. I don't know whoever it is. It's Muslims, it's Jews, it's Hindus, it's everybody, right? Everyone is perennially offended at something or the other. And then people will say, well, that's the law, Rupa, that's the law. And I'm a law and order type person, right? I'm very, very clear about that. If you have the law, if you have the rules, if you have the laws, you've got to enforce them, because we are a law governed society. Yep. But what if you have bad laws? And what are we going to do about that? What if, where are we? We're not even having these conversations in this country about why a particular piece of legislation that has already been there for like years and years and years, why that needs to go. We're not having those discussions at all. We're always reacting to something in the moment, right? We're not actually taking a broader look at all of the things that have gotten us to this point. And so you can't, people will say it's the law. Yeah, sure, it's the law, but but is this
Bill C-16 to amend the criminal code? That's the law.
Yeah.
But do you believe that's correct? So like Jordan Peterson fought so hard against this, and it passed anyway. Anyway. So in Canada, you can be hauled in front of a tribunal. It's not even a court. They create these fake tribunals. Like, it's Gestapo-esque. It's crazy. It's gross. Yeah. But instead of getting drugged before an actual justice for your misdeeds, somebody can take you there for misgendering them, for just saying the wrong pronouns that they've made up for any intents and purpose. So, I mean, whether it doesn't matter what your opinion is on this at any rate, because down the road, people could come up with new definitions of pronouns and new ideas, and it doesn't always end up as a contemporary issue. Someone, can make up a new thing, and then it's just as ludicrous as you think it is now for one side, and they come after you, and and it sounds punitive, and it sounds like something that somebody can use just as revenge. And this was the concern at the time. And this is all we've ever seen from it is this kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this, basic tension between liberalism and democracy. And we need to recognize that. And this is something that I grapple with all the time. Liberalism is based on individual liberty and freedom, but democracy can curtail those liberties and freedoms. And we've seen that in Canada, right? So we need to really prioritize liberty. I would love for someone to make the case in this country for our version of the First Amendment as a starting point. And all of the amendments in the United States constrains what democracy can do.
That's correct.
We don't really have that, right? And so I think that we're not even having those conversations. I mean, going back to this online harms bill, which only died because Trudeau prorogued Parliament. Imagine that had become the law. Imagine, and then
Orwell.
People would be
like, an Orwellian thing. Yeah.
That's the law. And I'm tired of hearing that, because not everything that is the law makes sense, and we need to have this conversation about I
hate to invoke the Nazi regime or Stalin's USSR, but everything that they did was legal under their legal systems. Like everything that they did, they were meticulous about making sure that everything they did was legal, and that doesn't make it moral or right at all.
No, and so and that's where that's where I find myself in right now when it comes to these issues, this tension between liberalism and democracy, and me being generally always advocated for more liberty, not less. I've had my faults. I mean, I've made mistakes in the past, for sure, but generally, in the long history of advocating for these things, I've generally been, very, very, I've stuck to my principles, is what I wanted to say. And I think, more Canadians need to ask themselves, why are they happy with this? Why are they offended by a meme? Why are they offended by, why is Charlie Angus going around presenting putting forward a private member's bill that would put you in, I mean, not that it had no hope of passing, but the point is, it shows where these people are coming from. This is where the thinking is. And there isn't
You didn't
enough
get it out. He proposed a bill to put people in jail people for saying nice things about oil.
Yeah, and
Like, it's
it's
crazy.
it's extraordinary that we can even, like, this is Canada, right? This is not, um I don't know, North Korea or China, or that's where you come to expect these sorts of proposals, not in a G7 country like Canada, not a liberal democracy like Canada. And the fact that the online harms bill was not, didn't, it was not Charlie Angus who came up with it, but it was, our parliamentarians, this government. And and some of the proposals in there were incredibly worrisome and draconian, and it just shows you uh, where these people are actually coming from, and they seriously think that a sizable chunk of this country would probably go for it.
And that's it. That's the two wolves and a sheep, right? It's the famous Benjamin Franklin quote, democracy is two wolves and a sheep discussing what's for dinner. And
Yeah.
it shouldn't be allowed. This concept, it should be a set of protections against the tyranny of the majority, in this case, of people being able to pass laws that infringe on other people's rights, just because of a popular idea in the moment.
Well, even, I mean, let's go back to Pierre Poilievre, right? He does say he wants to make Canada the freest country in the world, right? I love
Without any nothing to back it up,
no,
just
no
platitudes.
specifics,
Yeah.
but let's take him at his word.
Sure.
What does that mean? Is he gonna, um, you know, make sure that free speech is protected? Are we going to have something like a First Amendment? What does it mean to be the freest country in the world while we're still a very socialist society? We're still a very socialist country. I mean, I don't think you can have socialism and freedom. I don't think those two go together. I don't think they gel very well, as long as you have government still a very big part of our lives. I mean, 40% of this country's, is socialized. 40%. Think about that. That's astounding, and I think it's like 20% or something for America, maybe even less. And I think it went up a little bit during the pandemic, but it's generally been about 20% or so. We're at 40%. Pretty much everybody in this country is employed by the government at every level, the federal, provincial, municipal, you name it. And so you've basically grown up with socialism around you, and you don't think there could be any other system, right? And you've kind of accepted all of these things. It's not that different from people who live in places like China and North Korea. They're used to a certain system. They're used to a certain way of life. They're not going to revolt against it too much.
Because they know they'll be torn down. You get a certain amount of
Yeah.
privileges, and you be happy with those, or they'll no longer be with you. Rupa, I want to thank you so much for joining tonight. Links in the description down below. Everybody, go check out. Rupa's prolific on Twitter, so go check out her Twitter account, or sorry, X. We're calling it X now. I still can't get used to that. And the Free Press is the website. That's the news. This is where you can read Rupa's writings, And are you doing freelance for anyone else, or are you exclusive with them now?
Oh no, I'm exclusive with them now. I used to write for the National Post, but I it was either that or I go exclusive, and I chose the latter. And yeah, and which has been really good because I actually now get to write more about Canada. So takes on Canada that you are not necessarily going to see in the legacy media, for example. So I'm hoping I do more of that in the coming weeks and months.